Here to Help by a Mad Painter. She thumped her thumb to the beat of the music on the radio. Yes, the radio. She didn't care to listen on her phone or the computer when it came to music. She looked out the window at how hard it was raining and thought about how she was glad to be inside. Her name was Sue, and she was about to turn 27 but looked no more than 20. She jumped as the lights of the house flickered off and back on as lightning flashed outside. By the time the rumble reached her, she was laughing at being jumpy. It was the first storm of spring and the first storm since she had moved into the old farmhouse. It was not a big house, but it was just right for her. It was old but was built to last. She had moved in just over a month ago and enjoyed doing the few things that needed to be fixed. She had no real friends to speak of, and no living relatives that she knew of, so she was used to being alone, but now she was a few miles from town. She was able to keep her internet business running fine from there as easily as in town. It only took a couple of hours a day. All she did was take orders online, notify the distributors, and when the sale was made she received a percentage. It wasn't as easy as it sounds, but she was a master at the keyboard. She could run 50 or 60 orders an hour. She had no real need for a man in her life at this time, but sometimes she had thoughts about having a family. The radio crackled each time the lightning flashed. This irritated her. They were playing the soft rock that she liked so much. She decided to get out some candles from the kitchen just in case the power went out. She was going to paint over the dull light green walls to a light blue in the next couple of days. She had many ideas of what she could do to make the farm more her own. She had already ordered baby chicks and wanted a goat or two. She had the feeling that she would be there a long time if not the rest of her life. It took her a minute or two to find the candles. As she returned to her office, which at one time she was sure was a sewing room, the lights flashed again. The wind was picking up and the lightning was becoming more frequent, and now she could feel it. She looked at her computer. The net was down, so she checked her phone. It was still up, but only one bar showed. She was glad that the radio station was still working. That meant the power was still on in town. She had not checked the weather in a few days, so had no idea that the storm could last a few days. She looked out the window, which was on the side of the house. The side yard was not large before the woods started, maybe 20 yards. The trees were moving back and forth from the gusts of wind in an almost rhythmic fashion that changed with every flash of lighting. This gave her a creepy feeling, one she had never had in town when it stormed out. She wondered about a couple of feral cats that lived there. They would not come close to her yet, but she knew that one day they would trust her. On the radio the DJ's low deep voice said, "Hope you are all snug and warm. Temp to drop to the 50s tonight as the rain continues. Here is a little mood music for you." It was one of her favorites by the Doors, "Riders on the Storm." He had said rain to continue. She wondered for how long, and if the river not too far would overflood the road. She was not worried about that too much. She had plenty of canned goods, and as long as the power stayed on, her refrigerator and freezer were full. She sat down on the small couch and took a sip of her iced tea, and almost dropped the glass as the lightning flashed, followed by a hard rumble. It had hit something near, she thought. She went to the kitchen, where the window overlooked the backyard. As she reached it, the lights flicked and stayed out this time. She couldn't see anything, so went to the dining room window, where when she looked out saw that one of the old oak trees had been hit. A huge branch lay across the driveway and had pulled down the electric wire with it. There were sparks jumping from its end as the wind blew it around. It missed her old truck, but not by much. The sparks stopped, so she figured the power to the line went dead. She made her way back to the office and lit a candle. Then she remembered that her phone had a flashlight app on it. She picked it up and noticed there were no bars showing now. The service was now down too, but she knew that would not be down long, or hoped it wouldn't. She sat back down, not sure what to do. She was not ready for bed yet. It was going to be a long night, she thought, and didn't think she would be able to sleep as long as the storm was so intense. She looked at her phone again. It was at 50% power. She de-iced to turn it off to save power so that in the morning she could call the power company. She lay back and watched the shadows jump around the room from the flicker of the candle and the lightning flashes, which had moved farther away. Somewhere around midnight, she drifted asleep, but it was not restful. She dreamed that she was running from room to room in the house, from some unknown or unseen evil. It was the raw fear in her mind that drove her. As she entered a room, the door would slam shut behind her on its own. Outside it was storming, and the wind was howling. She thought maybe she should run out of the house, but when she tried the back door it would not budge no matter how hard she pulled on the knob. She turned and ran for the dining room. Her foot hit the edge of the counter and she began to fall. She jerked awake before she hit the floor in her dream. The candle was still lit, but it was almost gone, and it was still raining out, but the wind had calmed down. She decided to go to bed and in no time was asleep, but this time it was dreamless. When she woke she could hear it was still raining. Before even getting out of bed she checked her phone. The service was back up, so she called the power company. They told her they would be out as soon as they could. As she got dressed she thought she smelled bacon being cooked. This was strange because she had never cooked breakfast in the farmhouse. She only had coffee in the morning and would have an early lunch most days. When she reached the kitchen the smell was gone. By the time she had drank the first cup she had forgotten all about the smell. She went about her daily routine of swiping the old wood floors, and just as she got done a large truck pulled up. They were there to fix the power already. This made her happy. An hour later the power was back on. The radio came to life with the song, "I Got You, Babe," by Sonny and Cher. She had never shut it off when the power went down. She booted up the computer, but the net was still down. The rain was still coming down but was not as hard as last night. She was just glad that the wind had settled down. A woman's voice came on the radio and said, "There's a full moon tonight and they are saying the rain may let up a little for a couple of hours so we may get to see it shine, but hope it's not a bad moon rising." Then the song by CCR started. As she ate her lunch, she again smelled something that should not have been there. It was the smell that a lot of old ladies had for perfume, lilac. It didn't last long. It was as if someone had walked behind her at the store wearing it. She even turned to look but didn't see anyone. After lunch, she went to work cleaning up the living room. She got the stuff that was to be put in the attic in a box. There were a lot of knickknacks that came with the house, but she wanted to make the place more her own, so she kept a few of them. There was a ceramic farmer holding a rack with his wife holding a picnic basket that she loved. She was ready for a glass of iced tea, so grabbed the box and went to the kitchen where the attic access was. Killing two birds with one stone, she thought. She had set the box down on the counter, reached up, and pulled the stairs down and old musty air hit her nose. She had not been up there yet but was told there was a lot of junk there. She took out her phone and turned on the flashlight app before climbing up the stairs. Just at the top on a 2x4 was a switch for the lights. She looked at the junk that was all pushed to the sides. There were boxes that looked decades old, a couple of wooden chest drawers, and an old chair or two. It was really clean, she thought, not what you would think an attic would be. She went back down, got the box, went back up. Found a place to put it, and as she set it down noticed a piece of silver metal underneath a canvas tarp. She moved the tarp back and was surprised to find a weather vane. This one didn't look like any other one she had seen. Most were just iron and had a rooster, horses, or maybe a farmhouse, but this one was iron and silver and had a dragon on the top. It was a work of art, she thought, and should not be up in the attic, so took it down to the kitchen. When she set it down on the counter she caught the scent of pipe tobacco smoke. Again she looked around but didn't see anyone. It didn't make her feel uneasy, it was just out of place like the bacon and lilac smell. She got out some brasso and a clean rag and began to polish on the dragon. It was iron but the polish took off years of grime from the metal. The cross arrow was made of silver and cleaned up nicely. It didn't take long to clean it up, and when done she wondered why it had been put up in the attic. Was it originally part of the house, and was there a spot on the roof where it went? If it belonged there she had decided to put it back up there. It really was a work of art and maybe even a one-of-a-kind. She took a few pictures with her phone to check on the web. She looked at the clock. It was almost 4 and it was still raining out, but it was now lighter. She left the weather vane in the kitchen and headed back to the living room. When she was halfway down the hall she heard a loud popping sound, followed by tires screeching and a crash. She ran to the front door and looked out. There was a light blue car in the ditch. She grabbed her coat and an umbrella. By the time she opened the door and stepped out on the porch, a man got out of the car, waving his hand at her showing he was okay. In the other hand, he had a cell phone and was trying to call someone. Seeing he was okay, she didn't go out into the rain. The man walked around trying to get a signal, but she could tell he didn't have any luck. He began to walk up the driveway. He looked to be a middle-aged businessman, well keeping better than an average suit, that by now was very wet. He kind of smiled and said, "Sorry about your mailbox, blowout. Are you okay?" she asked. He kind of giggled and answered, "I'm fine, but my car is not. Is there a garage with a tow truck nearby?" He held up his cell phone and added, "No bars on this. Come up out of the rain. Service has been down since yesterday." He joined her up on the porch. "So do you have a landline?" he asked. She shook her head no and added, "Most likely the bridge is closed off with all this rain." She pointed in the way of town. He looked disappointed, turned, and was about to go back out into the light rain when she, for no reason she understood, said, "Hold on, you should come in, dry off, you'll catch a cold." She could tell he didn't want to be a burden to her, but said a cup of hot coffee would be nice after she had offered him one. "Sorry about the mess, still moving in and remodeling," she said as they entered the house. She led him to her office, and as he entered, the song "Devil Inside Buyings" began to play. She smiled and said, "Take your coat off and have a seat, I'll get the coffee going." She was not sure why she was being this nice. Normally she would never let a stranger in her home. There was something about him, an animal magnetism of some kind, she thought, as she put the water in the Mr. Coffee. She didn't drink much of it after breakfast, but he didn't look like the iced tea type, and the coffee would warm him up after getting wet. When she entered the office with a tray, he was sitting down on the couch. He had taken off his suit coat and it was draped over the arm to dry. "Hope you don't mind, kind of wet." He smiled. "Don't at all." She handed him a cup and said, "Sugar, milk?" He shook his head. "Black is fine, just needs to be hot." He took the cup. They talked for over an hour, and she learned his name was Chase, just like the bank. He laughed. He was on his way to a meeting in Georgia and didn't like flying, so rented the car. He was an investment advisor and successful at that, from what he told her. The DJ on the radio said the bridge was closed down till the next day and the cell and internet service should be back up later that night. She noticed the time and told him to relax as she went to fix them something to eat. She was enjoying his company more than she thought she should. She put the weather vane on the floor, and as she filled a pot with water to cook some spaghetti noodles, she looked out the window. It was getting dark, and as the radio said, the sky was clearing up some. The moon should be rising in about 30 or 40 minutes, she thought. By the time she went to drain the spaghetti, she noticed the moon was beginning to show in the trees. She took the food to the dinner table and looked at the office door. It was almost closed, so she was unable to see Chase. She yelled to come get it. After a moment she yelled again and still no reply, so she went to see if he fell asleep. She pushed the door the rest of the way open and he was not there, but his suit coat was still there. Maybe he went outside to see if he could get his cell to work, she thought. She went to the front door, opened it, and looked out. He was not on the porch, so she called his name. She could see all the way to his car because the moon was now topping the trees. He was not out there. She was about to close the door when she heard a low howl that grew to a full-out howl of a wolf coming from the woods on the side of the farmhouse. She slammed it shut. There were wolves in the area, but seldom seen by anyone, and she had never heard of someone getting attacked. She hoped Chase would be okay. She went to her office and took out the .38 she had in the drawer just in case. She walked through the house to make sure he was not there somewhere. When she reached the living room, she heard something outside, so looked out the window and thought she saw movement out at Chase's car. It was just a shadow, but she wanted to make sure he was okay, so went to the front door again. Opening it slowly a few inches, she yelled out, "Chase, Chase, are you there?" She started to pull the door open more when she again smelled pipe smoke, and when she pulled, it would only move a little, almost as if someone was holding it. She heard a noise on the driveway side of the porch, then there was a low growl. She pushed the door shut, hard. Fear filled her mind as she slid to the floor with her back against the door. She tried to listen, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat. Why would a wolf be stalking the farm or her? Was it rabbit? It had to be sick to risk coming around humans, she thought. She sat there for a few minutes and could not hear anything. Maybe it had moved on, she thought. Slowly she got to her feet, being as quiet as she could. She had never been as scared before. Her hands were shaking, so bad if she had to use the gun she most likely would miss. She went from room to room, turning off all the lights, hoping to make it hard for it to see into the house. She wondered what had happened to Chase. Was he still alive, hiding somewhere, or hurt somewhere, needing help? She checked her cell, it was still down. She crouched down by the office window and peeked out. The moon was now up full and lit up the yard. She sat there for some time when suddenly there was the sound of the glass on the front door bursting inward, scattering down the hall. She jumped and let out a squeal of fear. She pulled the hammer back on the pistol, watching the door to the hall. She heard the sound of sniffing as a shadow filled the doorway, but it was not the shape of a wolf, but somewhat the shape of a man. At first, she thought it was Chase. She had no clue how, or did she have time to think about it. All the lights in the house came on at the same time. What she saw shocked her. Standing in the doorway was what one could only call a werewolf, with its teeth showing in an evil-looking smile, and drool dripping from its mouth as it growled at her. She smelled lilac again, and in her ear, an old woman's voice said, "Run." She jumped up, dropped the gun, and ran into the dining room. As soon as she went through the door, it slammed on its own. The beast let a howl of anger and shook. There was a thud on the door that made the whole thing shake, and in her ear, she heard an old man's voice say, "The kitchen is where you need to be." She did as was told and went into the kitchen, and again the door slammed behind her. She heard the beast hit the door a couple of times and heard the door begin to give way. She went to the back door and tried to pull it open, but it would not move. She was stuck in the kitchen now, and the door would only slow the thing down. She went to the sink and grabbed a big knife, wishing she had never dropped the gun as the beast hit the door hard. It knew she was in there and was hell-bent on getting to her. She had never believed in the paranormal or cryptics before, but had no other way to explain what was going on. She held the knife up in front of her as the door was ripped from its hinges. The beast let out a howl seeing her standing there. Suddenly the room was full of the smell of pipe smoke that made the beast sneeze and shake its head. Out of the air formed a shape that became an old farmer holding a rake, and next to him was an old woman smiling. Sue was not sure what shocked her more, the beast or the appearance of the two apparitions. The beast staring looked just as shocked as she was. She backed over to stand next to the old woman, still holding up the knife. The beast moved the rest of the way into the room, never taking his eyes off the old farmer, who pointed down at the floor where lay the weather vane. It began to rock back and forth, then raised off the floor, all on its own. The beast looked confused at the sight. The old woman reached over and touched Sue's arm and whispered, "Don't worry, my dear, we're here to help and all will be back to normal soon." Nothing will ever be normal to her again, she thought. She heard the old farmer say something but was unable to make it out. Then he pointed at the beast, and the weather vane shot across the room and impaled itself into its chest. The beast let out a howl so loud she dropped the knife and lost consciousness. Epilogue. Miss, a voice called to her in the dark. Her head was spinning and it hurt. "She's coming around now." She opened her eyes. There was a young paramedic leaning over her, and she could see a couple of police officers standing there. One of them leaned down and said, "You are a mighty lucky young woman. Can you sit up?" The paramedic asked her. She slowly nodded her head and with help sat up. She looked over at where the beast had been, but it was not there. Instead lay Chase, the weather vane stuck in his chest. The officer that had spoken before said, "We've been after this guy for over a year now. He was wanted for over 24 murders." Wow, she thought. She was having a hard time dealing with all of this. Chase was the werewolf and they thought she had killed him. She would never tell them that he was killed by the ghosts of the former owners of the farmhouse. They would never believe her. She caught the smell of pipe smoke and lilac and knew as long as she lived there she would be safe.